Let's get sweaty.
Hey guys, welcome to another Shenmue Dojo video. Today's video, I'm going to be talking about the Shenmue 3 that we got, so the PlayStation 4 and the PC version, versus what the Dreamcast version could have been, or the Xbox version could have been, had it released in sort of 2003, 2004 time, roughly. Just humour me on that sort of time scale. I want to look at the story, I'm going to look at the setting and the aesthetics, I'm going to look at the gameplay, I'll have a quick look at the fighting engine while giving my final thoughts at the end of the video. Little precursor, I will be using some images taken from Phantom River Stone. Go check out the website if you haven't done so already, and I will also link the blogs that Switch has written in the description below, so you can check those out in further detail if you so wish. And thank you, Switch, for allowing me to use these pictures and any pictures you've let me use before. Thank you very much. So let's dive into the story now. As we all know and probably can agree on, the story in the Shenmue 3 that we got on the PlayStation 4 was probably one of the most lacking areas, for want of a better expression, in Shenmue 3. Shenmue 3 isn't a bad game, I quite enjoyed it, but whether you loved it or you didn't, we all agree that the story in Shenmue 3 that we got wasn't as probably up to par as we'd hoped. So firstly, I think I'd make a suggestion that the Shenmue 3 story that we got in the PlayStation version or the modern version isn't too far off an outline, I think, what would have been in the original script sets from the Legend of Akira days. If you look at the script sets, and there's going to be a photo popping up just now for you, they're not that big in terms of sort of what's in there. They're not sort of, that thick. There's not much in terms of potential content. And if people remember my interview with Ryan Payton, he said that essentially they sort of fill out the arcs, the B and the C characters when you're developing the thing, and then you have the broad outline of the journey, and Ryo's journey, as we know, is complete. It's there. They just essentially need to make it. But with that in mind, I think it then comes into a few things I think we would have still got with the story. I expect we'd have still got the developing relationship with Ryo and Shenhua. That was started in Shenmue 2 on the walk to Shenhua's house, up to Bailu Village. That was very much the key element of that fourth disc of Shenmue 2. So it would have been a natural progression to continue that idea, that relationship between the two. Maybe we've gone into more detail around it. I don't know. I actually thought the conversations in Shenmue 3 were quite good and quite detailed. But maybe we'd have got more of that, or certainly in the Niaowu section, we'd have had a continuation of that relationship, building up to a big crescendo at the end, hopefully in Baisha, which I'll come on to in a minute. What I think would have happened with Shenmue 3 on a Dreamcast or an Xbox is the broad outline wouldn't have been too dissimilar, but the B and the C characters would have been better filled out, probably to a Shenmue 2 sort of level, or at least a Shenmue 1 level. So when you think of Shilling, the Shrine Maiden, if you look at the Japanese website for Shenmue 3, it actually talks a little bit about her background, and that she actually wants to leave where she is and go on her own path. None of that's alluded to in Shenmue 3 that we got. So I wonder if they'd have filled up that backstory a little bit. Grandmaster Bay, would we have got more of him? Would we have got more of the other Grandmasters, like Grandmaster Sun and Grandmaster Feng, and their relationship potentially together as friends, but also with a Wow and Zhao Zhengming as well? Would we have got more of that? And that then brings me on to Bailu Village itself. Now, there's two sort of schools of thoughts here on Bailu Village. We all agree, I think, that it was probably more modern than we had anticipated. And I think, and most of us would agree with this, that it would have been much more rural in its setting. And it was certainly alluded to in those conversations going towards Bailu and Shenmue 2, that it was very much a rural village that was almost lost to the sands of time in some respects. So I think we'd have had a more rural setting. Now, that probably would have meant that it would have been smaller in terms of the scope and the size of the area you had to deal with. Whether we'd have spent less time there, potentially it could have worked that way, I'm not quite sure. But one thing I think we would and hopefully would have got more of is more of the training arc with a Wow and Zhao in Bailu. Why were they there? Why were they training there? How did they get there? Why did they leave? All of those questions could easily have been answered, hopefully, in that sort of time. But again, you've got the balance of the budget that Shenmue 3 had, that we got, it's very difficult to sort of balance out how much story you go with, but also the development. And we know a lot of the development time went towards the systems, etc., because they didn't have the source code. So then that brings me on to the continuity of the teams. Now, obviously, back in the day, had they gone straight into Shenmue 3, you'd have had the continuity of most of the team who worked on the original games were there. You'd have had the story continuity in terms of the writers. And I think you'd have just had a better flow from Shenmue 2 to Shenmue 3 in terms of the story continuity. I mean, 15 years between announcements and God knows how much longer, 18 years to release. People will forget things, move on, not come back. Things don't quite line up. Things change as well, given the circumstances. I think the story circumstances would have been quite different with Shenmue 3 on a Dreamcast. The way I think it would have been structured would have been essentially you spend a bit of time in Bailu, then you go to Niaowu. I think that's very, very much planned, and in the chapter cards you can see a Niaowu type place. And now I think we would have got Baisha. Now, the idea in my mind being that there'd have been like potentially the major assault on the castle in Niaowu. Potentially, I don't know, it's just me spitballing the idea here. But then you'd have gone to Baisha, maybe had to storm Baisha, and then you'd have had Shenhua discovering her powers for the first time. Think to the Project Berkeley footage where she shoved those guys away and Landy looks really, really surprised. We could have got that. Now, how would that have been for a cliffhanger ending then? Shenhua smashes the place up and then you get the ending. Or maybe just something afterwards. It may be leaning into the Shenmue Online stuff. Who knows? Who knows? But it's very clear, as I said, many, many times they ran out of time and money for Shenmue 3 that we got. And I do think we'd have got more in the story content just in terms of time, money, continuity, a slightly different feeling to Bailu Village, etc. than we got. It's not a criticism, it's just a sort of comparison between the two. So that comes on a little bit to the setting, the aesthetics. As I said, Bailu would have been more rural. I think broadly it would have been the same, but it could have potentially been a smaller setting. I think we could have then potentially got some more rural-based mini-games, which I'll come on to in a moment. I don't think, love nor money, we would have seen an arcade in Bailu Village. I just don't think it was set up for that. I think it was something that was put into Shenmue 3 when it was made back in sort of 2015 onwards to give people something to do there. Because sort of traipsing around a rural village with not a lot to do isn't going to appeal to many gamers. We'd have loved it, I'm quite sure, had the story content been there, but you're striking a balance there. And I think had that flow from Shenmue 2 to Shenmue 3 straight away, I think the audience would have gone with it and almost been expecting something like that, rather than sort of the big gap we had, which therefore meant they had to almost entice people in, I guess, which maybe sacrifice some bits and pieces here. On that subject, Shenhua's house, we know it got an extra room in the PlayStation 4 and PC release. I don't think that would have happened on Dreamcast or Xbox. I think they had just lifted the asset and boom, there you go. But I think probably we wouldn't have seen a change to our house. And again, it wouldn't have had a generator in it and it'd been very rural as it was in Shenmue 2. Niaowu, I think, would have been really, really cool to see on a Dreamcast. I'd love to have seen how they would have scaled that, how they would have made that look from an aesthetics point of view. Bearing in mind, it nearly blew up with Wanshai. I do think they could have done it. I wonder if it may have been slightly smaller. I don't know. But one thing I think it may have had more was NPCs walking around hustle and bustling. And while Niaowu was beautiful and it didn't feel too empty, I do think it could have felt busier. So that may have been sort of a port of call they made it look slightly busier with the NPC count with the Dreamcast engine, but I imagine it would have pushed it quite hard. On top of that, I think Baisha, again, you would have probably got that there as well. And one thing that I forgot to mention with the story content is that we found, or Landisi found and Switch found way back, is the titles of Baisha, etc. in the Watch Shenmue code, which was found years and years ago. So we know that it was certainly intended to be a very important area. So I think that would have been planned from way back, and then would have obviously been implemented. I've been interested to see how that looked on a Dreamcast as well, and what they could have done with that. The music implementation, I think, would have been done better. I didn't have a problem with the music they generally used. Some of the shops were a bit odd, like having darts in a random cafe, for example, was a bit weird. So they may have implemented the music a bit better. Some of the looping may not have been there as well, just to sort of give it that proper Shenmue feel in terms of the Dreamcast, where each shop had its own individual song, etc. Whether they'd have done that, I don't know, but I think the looping would have gone. The Dreamcast graphics obviously would have been fine. People quite liked that at the time. I think they still quite like them even now. And Dreams of Saturn obviously showed that even in 2023, 2024, there's still an appeal for it and that sort of aesthetic. So that's great. Moving away then from the setting aesthetics, I want to talk a little bit about the gameplay. Now, one of the most maligned gameplay elements is the stamina system. I wasn't a fan of it. I think lots of people weren't a fan of it. Would it have made it into a Shenmue 3 on Dreamcast? Now, I don't know. Yu Suzuki talked about years and years ago when Shenmue was in development about wanting to do a stamina system. So it made sense that he implemented it now. Maybe didn't have the tools back then to do so. So you sort of in this 50-50 scenario. It could have done, but for continuity's sake, would they have bothered with it? I don't know. I don't think it would have differed too much in the gameplay or style that we got overall. I think we'd have had different mini games. I think we'd have had wood chopping would have been in. I think it would have fitted quite naturally with Bailu. Herb hunting would have done. I think fishing would have done as well. But I think that might have been it. Or you might have got some more rural-based, like farming type games as an example, to sort of help the village, do tasks or chores around the village for people, rather than sort of having lucky hit stands everywhere and the arcade. I think it'd have been stripped back just to very rural type mini games. Then I think the arcade, etc., would have come into Niaowu, depending obviously the length of the Bailu section, which I think may have been cut down slightly to then get you into sort of the meat and the potatoes of the story, and where I think Shenmue 3 would have ended up had it been on a Dreamcast. QTEs, let's be honest, they were really tough in Shenmue 3. I think, and I'm pretty sure they'd have just followed the system from the original games. Nobody had an issue with the timing of that or anything to do with it. I know people malign QTEs a little bit back then, but I think the timing windows would have been better, and I think they'd have just implemented the action QTEs from Shenmue 2 potentially, and that structure around it. So I think it may have been more palatable to players, and certainly less difficult, although that could also be because we're getting older and suck, but I don't know. One of the best things they brought into Shenmue 3 that we got was the Chobi-chan hunt. I like to think we'd have got it, but I don't think, honestly, hand on heart, I don't think we would have done. I think there'd have been enough story content, enough other things going on that maybe you didn't need it. Could they have had another type of hunt in there? Potentially. It's a very Shenmue type thing to do, to get you looking around, to get you interacting with the environment. And Chobi-chan is one of the best things they put into Shenmue 3 by far. It was excellent. I'm not sure we'd have got it. I like to hope we'd have got it, or something similar in a Shenmue 3 on Dreamcast Xbox, but who knows. Then we talk about sort of change of clothes here. Now, going to the chapter cards, you will see that chapter card 5, you can see Ryo in the green training gear. Now, we had the clothes system in Shenmue 3, but it really didn't sort of tie into anything. You just change clothes if you want to. I wonder whether that system would have been implemented around the story, that you'd have got given training gear for the training art, potentially from one of the grandmasters that you meet on the journey. You train with them as part of the story, part of the game, before moving on to the next section. That would have worked really nicely, and it would have been cool to see that training gear in the story context. Not to say we won't see it in a story context later, but it would have been cool to have it in Shenmue 3, and I think we probably would have done on Dreamcast had it gone that way. The next thing I'm going to talk about is the user interface. It is a little clunky, if I'm brutally honest with people. I didn't mind it. I got round it, but you'd have got on a Dreamcast, you'd have got a straight over interface from Shenmue 1 and 2. You'd have had your items carry over as well. Now, they did carry over a lot of items from the original games on the PlayStation 4 and PC, but obviously you'd have had the save transfer feature as well, which I think would have worked quite nicely, and I think people would have quite liked that. On top of that, I think sort of going into the gameplay and the sound elements, I wonder if they'd have gone Japanese dub again only. I know obviously Xbox had the English only. Maybe they'd have localized it, so in the West it'd have been English, and in Japan it would have been just Japanese. I really don't know. Although they did elect to only release the Japanese dub with subtitles, of course, in PAL region, so maybe they'd have gone down that road as well, potentially save some money. I don't know. 50-50 on that one, shall we say. I think one thing for pretty sure here, we'd have got Sega arcade games, without a doubt. So you'd have got your darts back, you'd have got your Hang On, you got your Outrun, your Afterburner, and I think you may have got some other Sega arcade titles in there as well, which would have been quite cool. Obviously not too many sort of fourth wall break ones, but some of the old school Sega arcade titles on top of what's already been in Shenmue 1 and 2 would have been really, really good to see. Actually, I think the mechanical arcade games in Shenmue 3 that we got worked really, really well, and maybe that we'd have seen some of those as well. I mean, obviously QT Title is a mechanical arcade game at its heart, so we could have seen sort of a whack-a-mole type game as well, or even Highway Star potentially in a Dreamcast version. Who knows? It would have been quite cool. And I don't know whether they were that was planned from years and years ago or not. But I do think we'd have got more Sega arcade games and IP in terms of the arcade, the capsules, those sorts of things that I think some people missed in the Shenmue 3 we got. I think we would have got on a Dreamcast or Xbox. Then that brings me into probably another more controversial topic, is the fighting engine. As everybody knows, but just anybody who's new and not played Shenmue yet, or is only just discovering the series for the first time and is getting really into the nitty-gritty sort of stuff, Shenmue obviously was derived from Virtua Fighter. It was originally Virtua Fighter RPG, and therefore what they used in Shenmue 1 and 2 on the Dreamcast, and I presume on the Saturn, was the Virtua Fighter fighting engine, which everybody knows is one of the best fighting engines going. It's really, really good, especially for one-on-one combat. Although, I'm going to upset some people here, I felt that the multi-man battles in Shenmue 3 were better with the combat system that was there and the camera that was there in Shenmue 3. I found in the original games, sometimes the camera would screw you over in those multi-man fights. The engine was great, and it was really, really good in those one-on-one battles. But I'm not quite sure it lent itself quite to the multi-man battles. But on Dreamcast, etc., they could have ironed some things out, updated the engine, etc., etc. Bearing in mind Virtua Fighter 4 was originally in development for Dreamcast, obviously moved over to the PlayStation 2, so you'd have had potentially an updated engine in a Shenmue 3, Shenmue 4 on a Sega console or Xbox if it went that way. We would categorically have had throws. That's without question. So on Dreamcast, as everybody knows, Ryo is a martial artist with jiu-jitsu, so therefore it's a heavily throw-based martial art, and it is represented really, really well in the Dreamcast games because you can throw people everywhere, you can launch counter-attacks. Later on, obviously, you learn counter-elbow assault, you learn swallow dive and swallow flip, and you learn all sorts of nice little counter-attacks which work really, really well. They're not quite there in the Shenmue 3 combat engine because they don't have throws. Now, the reason they don't have throws, I'm just going to say this for everybody again, is that they had to shoot the motion capture in Wisenet office. They had to hire the equipment and were afraid of breaking it and damaging it and probably damaging themselves a little bit. Flip back to the original development of Shenmue 1 and 2. Masaya Matsukaze talked about in the Kickstarter that they were using state-of-the-art facilities. They were using ropes, crash mats. When they were hitting each other, they were using the ropes to throw people back to create the impact of that. They did not have the benefit of any of that when shooting the combat engine and the motion capture for that. For Shenmue 3 that we got. Although I will say that the motion capture for a lot of the fighting scenes in the cutscenes are very well done, and the fight with Landy is probably the best one in the game in terms of the choreography there. Just my view. But we would have got throws. There's no question about it. And things like body check could have been used in actual combat. So it would have been very much like counter elbow assault. You wait for your opportunity to use it, use the input, bam, then you body check somebody, they go flying, thank you very much. But also it would have had the story impact that it would have done. As a side note, and going back to story, I do think you'd have started learning moves again. We would have learned the body check, I'm pretty sure, because it's a Baji Kwan move, and that's pretty much what Ryo is being taught when he moves through. Obviously, he samples other martial arts, but Baji Kwan is the main one that he is learning, and that was also what his father was learning when he went to Japan, China, losing the plot. So I do think we'd have got the move learning anyway. I just don't know if we'd have had sort of body check and reverse body check. Who knows? Anyway, moving sort of away from the fighting engine, come into my sort of final thoughts. It is my view that the story broadly would have been the same. I think Ryo would have lost to Landy. That's a given. He's nowhere near ready, and that's been talked about to absolute death. But I think it'd have been much more filled out in terms of the characters, in terms of the environments, and in terms of the sort of progress being made. I think it'd been much more filled out. I also think we would probably ended up in Baisha, potentially the Cliff Temple, with a big sort of ending. As I've talked about here many times, Baisha was planned, has been planned for a long time. Whether we'll get it in Shenmue 4, I don't know, but it was in the files for Watch Shenmue, so again, it was clearly important. And it's like I said, the game probably would have ended up there. Bailu definitely would have felt different, much more rural. Niaowu, I'd have loved to have seen that on a Dreamcast engine. And the fighting system would definitely have been the Virtua Fighter engine without a shadow of a doubt. And I think that's probably one of the biggest differences you'd have had in terms of that side of things. In terms of broad gameplay, I don't think we'd have had anything massively different. I think Shenmue 3 that we got follows on from the Shenmue formula quite well, but I don't think we'd have got the stamina system. Some of the mini games in Bailu I think would have been more rural. But again, who knows? This is all sort of me sort of spitballing, guessing. What, guys, would you have liked to see from a Dreamcast version of Shenmue 3? Do you think anything from the PlayStation 4 and PC versions would have made it over into the Dreamcast version if it was released back then? What improvements or differences do you think there would have been? And drop us a comment below, guys, and I'll pick some of these up. On top of that, guys, I also need to give a thanks to our members who signed up and pay a couple of £1 a month and you get the videos early. There's no content hidden behind a paywall. It's completely optional, so if you don't want to sign up for it, that's absolutely fine. All the funds, etc., go towards helping James and I run the website. But for the 16 of you, thank you very much. Top of the list, I'm going to go Guppy, Koi, Bruce Wayne 937, Survival Spears, Peter Hoffland, Sean Don, Wandering Through Shenmue, Phantom Riverstone, who again, thank you for letting me use these pictures, Nova, Bruce Wayne 911, Mike Franz, Manny Figueroa, Master Mo, Nick Hughes, Sean Hastings, Clunky Mage, William Lovering. Thank you for signing up to be members. Hope you're enjoying the content. And everybody else, guys, thank you so much for dropping in on the Shenmue Dojo content as you keep doing each and every week. Don't forget to give us a like, share, subscribe on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, all the usual places that you can find us. And I'll be back with a video not too far from now. But for now, guys, thank you very much for joining me. It's been a long one. Take care. Have a good one.